Okay, let's talk about Andrew Jackson's second term, and this is called a new crisis because there's actually several crises we have to talk about. Andrew Jackson has won re-election. The bank war is over. Jackson wins and handily wins re-election to his second term. But there are going to be lots of problems. Okay, two of the problems he's going to have is states' rights. Remember, again, states' rights are the rights of states to limit the power of the federal government. This is an argument that goes all the way back to the founding of our government. The power of the federal government versus the power of the state government. All right? Now, this is going to separate President Andrew Jackson from his vice president, John C. Calhoun. They are going to disagree on this so much that Andrew Jackson threatens to hang John C. Calhoun. Wow. Hanging the vice president? Wow. It also affects two other important issues. Tariffs. Tariffs are the taxes on imported goods, a fee charged to imported goods, and the rights of Native Americans to lands that are guaranteed in treaty by the United States of America. Okay? So in 1828, right before Andrew Jackson takes off, Congress passed the highest tariff ever. All right? The South nicknames it the tariff of abomination, something that is so hated they call it an abomination. And remember, the tariffs are put into place to protect northern manufacturing. There's hardly any manufacturing that's going on in the South. So this tariff, a tax on imported goods, is going to be a problem for people in the South because the South, as I mentioned, has very little manufacturing. They are taking their products that they grow in the South, shipping them off to Europe, and buying European goods. Now they're having to pay more money out of their pocket on these higher European goods to protect northern manufacturing. And they see this once again as another example of the federal government favoring the North at the South's expense. All right? Many people, and especially John C. Calhoun, thinks that this is unconstitutional. All right? They think it's wrong. Let's see what happens. Now, the vice president, John C. Calhoun, oops, that's an awful color. Let me do that. John C. Calhoun agreed with the South. Now, and he's going to end up being the guy that's leading the charge against these high tariffs, right? But remember, he's vice president of the United States. Calhoun claimed that states had the power of nullification or canceling a federal law they thought was unconstitutional. If you remember back, this goes all the way back to John Adams' administration. When John Adams passes the Alien and Sedition Act, signs that, bill into law, you'll remember his vice president was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said that this was unconstitutional and states did not have to obey it. If you remember the Kentucky-Virginia Resolution, Thomas Jefferson told these states that you can nullify it, basically saying that if you don't believe it's constitutional, then the people in those states do not have to follow it. This is a bad idea. It's a dangerous idea. Can you imagine today if the federal government passed laws and the states decided if they're going to obey it or not? This is a dangerous idea. And I told you that when we talked about John Adams' administration. Okay, so John C. Calhoun claims that the states have the power of nullification. Okay, they think that this tariff is too high. They do not want to have to pay for to protect northern manufacturing. They think it's unconstitutional. Now Jackson, and by the way, Jackson isn't crazy about this either. Remember, he's from the South. He's a large plantation owner, but he is the president of the United States, and he realizes that the federal government isn't going to work if states get to decide if they're going to follow a law or not. So Jackson and his vice president, John C. Calhoun, have a big argument over this. Calhoun resigned from office because of the disagreement with Jackson. He goes back home to South Carolina where he is elected as a senator. So Jackson has resigned. I quit as Vice President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, because I do not agree with you. He goes back to South Carolina. And now he is back in Washington, D.C. as a senator. All right? Okay, so in 1832, Congress passed a law that slightly lowered the tariff. All right? Everybody should be happy, right? Oh, no. South Carolina passed what's called the Nullification Act. The Nullification Act, oh man, these colors. Nullification Act, and declared that the 1832 tariff was illegal. South Carolina threatens to leave the Union, to secede. Right? Now, no other state supported South Carolina, thank God. And they withdrew the Nullification Act, and the argument went away, at least for now. Okay, and I got to mention one other thing, though. Congress has actually passed a bill called the Force Bill that says the president can use force, the Army, to make states obey. Now, Jackson also realized that if South Carolina, follows along with this Nullification Act and talks about threatening to leave the Union, it's going to lead to civil war. So he threatens to go down to South Carolina and hang John C. Calhoun from a tree. So fortunately, for at least at this time, no other state supports South Carolina. So South Carolina looks like they're standing by themselves. So they withdraw the Nullification Act. The argument does go away, at least temporarily. But the argument over states' rights versus, power of the federal government is still going to be something that's boiling under the surface. Okay, let's talk about one of the most tragic things that happened in the United States history, and especially under Andrew Jackson. Okay, as you know, and we've talked about this for some time, white settlers, for 100 years, or almost 100 years, well, since 1863 probably, they've been going over the Appalachians and claiming land. Pontiac has tried to stop this. Tecumseh and his brother the Prophet have tried to stop this, but to no avail. But in the southeast United States, you have 5 Indian tribes: the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and the Seminole. They all live in the southeast. They are on land that has been protected by treaty with the federal government. But guess what? This land is great for growing cotton, and the white settlers want it. They wanted the land for themselves. And Jackson sided with the settlers, not the natives. Okay? They want these people out. The sad part about this, and let's talk about the Cherokee in particular. The Cherokee have done everything that they think they need to do to fit into the white man's world. They live in villages, they farm, they've given up the warpath. Many of them have adopted Christianity. They have a written language, they have a newspaper, they have a constitution that's modeled after the United States Constitution. Right? They have done everything they need to do, to fit into the white man's world, except for one thing. They have land that the white settlers want. All right? So what's the government going to do? All right? The government has sided with the white settlers. So the government, just can't go in there and massacre them. So the government sets aside land beyond the Mississippi River and persuaded, hey, go over there, we won't bother you. This is present-day Oklahoma. It was called Indian country or Indian territory. They first tried to persuade them, and then finally they're going to force the Indians to go there, all right? Okay, so we need to talk about the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act. All right. The state of Georgia felt that they had the right to make laws for the Cherokees because they live inside the Georgia boundaries, right? So they say, hey, listen, you're inside the boundaries of Georgia, so we're going to make the laws for you. Well, the Cherokees sue them, okay? And this goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court in a case called Worcester versus Georgia. And guess who wins? That's right, the Cherokees. The Cherokees win the court case. The Supreme Court and John Marshall, and you remember about John Marshall, he's been around for quite some time, argues that the state of Georgia cannot make laws that govern the Cherokee. It's a separate treaty they signed with the federal government. So, Georgia, stop it. You can't do it. This is where Andrew Jackson does a complete flip-flop, a 180. Remember, under the nullification crisis, he said that the federal government, is right. States, you have to obey the federal government. Well, the Supreme Court has said that the Cherokee have signed a treaty with the federal government. So therefore, they cannot be forced off their land. Well, in this case, Jackson sides with the state of Georgia. All right? He refuses to enforce the Supreme Court's ruling. In fact, there's a statement that says the Supreme Court has made the ruling, now let them enforce it. Well, Jackson would have to enforce that decision, and he won't do it. So, persuaded by white Southerners in Congress, they pass a new law called the Indian Removal Act, right here, Indian Removal Act of 1830, okay? And they are going to use force to force the Native Americans to move west of the Mississippi River to the Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, okay? So even though the Supreme Court has ruled in the Cherokees' favor, the federal government says that Georgia does not have the right to do that. Andrew Jackson says, I don't care what you say, I'm going to side with Georgia in this case. Now, where's the outrage? How come people aren't marching in the streets? Because it is the white people who want this land. They don't really care about the rights of the natives. Get them out of here. We want their land. So they forced these tribes in 1838 westward. And they used the United States Army to drive over 15,000 Cherokees over what is called the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears, again, is that very long, sorrowful journey west. Now think about this. This is the land that you had grown up on. This is where your grandparents are buried. Maybe your parents are buried. You know nothing else. You know the crops that grow there. And now you're going to be forced away from your home, never, ever to return. Okay? They have to walk hundreds of miles. It's going to take many months. And thousands died, and mostly women and children. And the elderly. Okay, women and children. The weak, the vulnerable. Thousands of them died on this journey. And as they get to Oklahoma, it's a completely not desert, but desolate area. They struggle because the crops that they try to grow in Oklahoma will not grow. The crops that they grow in Georgia don't grow in Oklahoma. This is a terrible tragedy, and it is basically forced on these people by the United States government. Now here's a map. The Cherokee are the ones, because the Cherokee land is, right here. They're all forced into this area right here called the Indian Territory. There's the Chickasaw land, the Choctaw land, the Creek land, and the very small creeks, because remember, the Creek had been defeated by Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812. And finally, the Seminole. Now, the Seminole, though, let me change color here. The Seminole are living down in Florida. They're out in the swamps and the bayous of Florida. It's going to be a little tougher for the United States Army to get these people out of this land. So the Seminole, resisted removal. They all, were going down into the Everglades or to the swamps. So in 1817, 1818, this is way back before the Indian Removal Act, the United States Army had fought what's called the First Seminole War, which they don't win. They are not able to get the Seminoles out of Florida. Okay, the First Seminole War, again, was led, by a guy named Chief Osceola. It ends in 1818. The Second Seminole War starts like in 1835, I think it is, and goes to 1842, I believe. And then finally there's a Third Seminole War that began in 1858. And then finally, in the Third Seminole War, a lot of the people are rounded up and captured and moved. But, there are still many Seminole that escaped and never left Florida. Okay, so what happens is in 1837, Andrew Jackson, steps down. He serves 2 terms. He follows the precedent set by George Washington, and he leaves after 2 terms. Now, Martin Van Buren, who had been his Secretary of State in his first term, and then Vice President in the second term, is elected. Now, he's not as popular, as dynamic as Andrew Jackson, but, he's still pretty competent. But he is going to have a lot of problems. And the biggest problem he's going to face is economic problems because of the Panic of 1837. It is the worst economic crisis the nation had ever seen. The worst. Okay, this crisis really begins with Andrew Jackson and his bank war. Okay, remember in 1836, Andrew Jackson closes the Bank of the United States. Well, also at this time, people out west, many people were selling land. And speculators are going in there and they're buying up the land, hoping to make a huge profit. Now, without the Bank of the United States to regulate the flow of money, states are the ones that are issuing the money. And to keep up with demand, they are just printing money, just printing pieces of paper out. It's not backed by gold or silver. Well, Andrew Jackson is like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to require anybody who buys land to pay for it with gold or silver. So all these people then go take their paper money back to the state banks to get gold and silver, and guess what? They don't have enough gold and silver. So there's this huge economic crisis and a Great Depression. Prices are inflated. Businesses decline. Many people lost their jobs. At one point, over 90% of factories closed. Thanks, Andrew Jackson. 90% of the factories closed. And remember, who's working in these factories? The common man. The people that had probably voted for Andrew Jackson. But this crisis doesn't just affect northern manufacturing. No. Guess what happens? In the South, there's a cotton surplus. Too much cotton. In other words, they're growing so much cotton that, people are like, I don't need any more cotton. So the price on cotton falls. And what had happened is Southerners had been, borrowing money from state banks. As they sell the cotton, they pay that back. But now with prices declining, they can't pay their money back. So this is affecting not just the northern manufacturing sector, but also the southern farmers and planters. So, as you might well imagine, Martin Van Buren has a really tough presidency. So let's talk about the election of 1840. Van Buren ran against a Whig candidate. So for this time, guess who doesn't run? Henry Clay. Nope, they put up another guy, William Henry Harrison. Remember, the general that had won the battle at Tippecanoe. He's the general that had beaten Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames. All right? Tippecanoe and Tyler too is their motto. Tippecanoe for William Henry Harrison, and Tyler, who's going to be his vice president. So Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Both sides campaigned, dirty, lots of mudslinging. It was a nasty election. Now, William Henry Harrison, tries to portray himself as a man of the people, kind of model himself after Andrew Jackson, a war hero, a simple man. But William Henry Harrison is actually highly educated. At the time of the election, he lived in a beautiful mansion. So they try to, but they don't want him to say, hey, he's a super rich, fancy guy. He wants to portray himself as a man of the people. So Harrison wins the election. Okay? But he's not going to be president for long. On his day of his inauguration, it's a very cold day. It's March. He gives like a 2.5-hour speech. They tell him to wear a hat, but he doesn't because he doesn't want to look old and frail. He wants to show, I'm a tough guy. Well, he ends up getting sick and getting pneumonia, and he dies 32 days into his presidency. Oh, man. So the first Whig president lasts 32 days. And guess who becomes president? Tyler. John Tyler, Tippecanoe, and Tyler too. John Tyler becomes the president. Okay, so here's old John Tyler now, the Whig president. Now, John Tyler had been a Democrat. He had kind of switched parties, became a Whig. Now, the people are going to be very disappointed in John Tyler, especially his party. He doesn't live up to the ideals that the Whigs wanted. So when the Whigs come up with a new economic plan to recharter the Bank of the United States, John Tyler vetoes it. And guess what? They kick him out of the party. They said, John Tyler, you can't be a Whig anymore. Boom, he's out of the party. All right? He is going to have a tough presidency as well. All right, so there you go. Andrew Jackson's second term, it's marked by a crisis with the tariff of abomination, the nullification crisis, the Indian Removal Act. He leaves office, and then Martin Van Buren comes in. He faces economic depression because the Bank of the United States has closed down. He gets thrown out of office after one term. William Henry Harrison, a Whig, wins presidency, but he dies 32 days into his presidency. And now John Tyler becomes the president, and he disappoints his own party so much they throw him out of the party. Well, there you go. That's all I'm going to talk about today. A lot of information. Review this again if you need to. There's going to be a lot of information on the test on this one, so pay attention.